Hey, BattleTech buddies, it's tactics time. So I tend to talk quite a bit about force construction in BattleTech, and I also talk quite a bit about tactics. But a thing that I haven't been doing so much that I'd like to start doing today is bringing the two together. So what I'm up to today is talking about a particular kind of strategy you can use, and together with how to design a force to achieve that goal. And the topic is evasion tactics, okay? What does an evasion strategy look like in BattleTech? This is a strategy where you are trying to first and foremost preserve your own forces from destruction by using movement and avoidance of enemy attacks. Now, evasion strategies in wargames can be a tough issue, a pretty delicate issue, because a lot of the time they're not the most fun to play against, especially if a player does them really well. Okay, so my philosophy in this video is going to be, I'm going to leave that question to you. The question of how much fun do you want to make the game for your opponents? And I'm going to tell you what's the best way to execute an evasion strategy. And I'll kind of leave you to decide what do you want to do with that information. I think in BattleTech, the unfunness of the evasion strategy for your opponent is a little bit counterbalanced by the fact that evasion is one of the more difficult strategies to play in BattleTech. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of thinking, and so it's not always super duper fun for you, the player who's doing it either. So what is involved in an evasion strategy? Fundamentally, at its heart, it's a matter of making yourself difficult to damage, difficult to hit in BattleTech, on the one hand, while on the other hand, making it possible for you to achieve your victory conditions. And a lot of the time in BattleTech, you're going to be fighting a stand-up fight, or you're going to be fighting a scenario in which you have a particular target, and so that's going to be a matter of achieving your victory conditions by giving yourself opportunities to do damage to your opponent. So if you're going to be making yourself difficult to hit while also leaving yourself the opportunity to do damage to your opponent, we're usually talking about giving yourself very high target movement modifiers, okay? And of course, anytime you're giving yourself high target movement modifiers, you're doing something like running or jumping, and those things make it difficult for you to hit too. So you're simultaneously increasing the difficulty for your opponent to hit and the difficulty for yourself to hit. Of course, another way to make yourself difficult to hit, and you usually want to combine these two methods in an evasion list, another way to make yourself hard to hit is to stay at longer range, so that your opponent's closer range weapons don't have a chance of getting you. Of course, again, the more you stay at long range, the tougher it is for you to hit your opponent as well. So one of the things that slows the game down a bit when you're playing an evasion list, and it can make things more frustrating, sometimes for both players, is that it's a matter of increasing your opponent's difficulty by a lot while making it somewhat more difficult for you to hit. So you're making it harder for everybody, and you're just making it extra harder for your opponent and not so bad for you. Now, one of the things that's especially challenging about an evasion strategy is that it usually rests, for the reasons that I've just discussed, on units that are some of the most overcosted units according to the battle value formula. Because you've got to generally use units, at least quite a few of them, that are both fast moving, preferably fast moving and jumping in a lot of situations, but you have to use units that are fast moving and that mount long range weapons. And it's just a fact that the way that the battle value formula works, it's just a fact that mechs and other units that are both long ranged and fast moving are really highly costed in battle value. The formula is just going to make it so that their battle value cost is super high for what you get. So something like a Griffin, for example, a mech that I love very much, it's not a mech that I use very much in competitive BattleTech because the Griffin just costs so many battle value points for what you get compared with other mechs that are either slower and long-ranged or mechs that are faster but shorter ranged. But if you're going to be playing an evasion strategy, you're going to have to rest that strategy on mechs like the Griffin. Indeed, I would say that the Griffin is probably the slowest kind of unit that I would want to use in an evasion list. If I'm putting together an evasion list, this isn't a way that I play very often, but if I am putting together an evasion list, the minimum movement capability that I would want a unit to have would be walk 5, run 8, and jump 5. Another thing about evasion that makes it difficult to play is that it really does depend quite a bit on geography. You know, it depends a lot on what's the configuration of the map. If you are trying to play an evasion strategy on a small map, like maybe you're playing on just one regular 16 by 17 BattleTech map, you're going to have a real difficult time staying out of your opponent's range enough to make their 2-hit numbers difficult enough. Now, there's no reliable way to just make yourself 100% impossible to hit, so you're going to want to have forces in your evasion list that are somewhat difficult to destroy. They need to have enough armor and resilience to take a few hits. This means most of the time battle mechs. It's really not especially viable to build an evasion list around, for example, hovercraft or even VTOLs, even though these are two of the most fast-paced, difficult-to-hit types of units in the game. Because once these guys do take hits, it's really easy for them to die. Whereas if you have a fast mech, it can be very resilient, even though it's that fast. So most of the time, you're going to want to make your evasion list out of mechs. So you want a combo of fast, resilient, and long range. This is a difficult combination to work on the inner sphere side. It's really hard to make an inner sphere mech that has that combination of speed, resilience, and firepower at long range. And especially in some of the kind of earlier eras of the game, you're not really going to find any significant number of mechs that can do this. So it's a lot easier to make an evasion list work as a clan player, especially in earlier eras like the clan invasion. One of the big factors in this is the clan versus inner sphere extra light engines. Because if you're going to have a fast moving unit with good armor, it's hard to do that without putting on an XL engine. And then the clan XL engine, it's so much more resilient than the inner sphere engine because you can lose a side torso with a clan extra light engine mech, and you can't do that with an inner sphere mech. So it just makes the clan mechs with XL engines just so much more hard to kill. So here's an example of a mech that's available pretty early in the game's history and is available to the clans and is just such a strong mech for these evasion list purposes. This is the Huntsman or Nobori Nin A. It has a long-range arsenal, jump 5, and its long-range arsenal is based around the clan large pulse laser, which is easy to hit with at its 14 hex medium range. So you can take this Huntsman and use its 5 hexes of jump movement to keep it fairly far outside of the easy to hit range of your enemy mechs. Plus that jump movement of 5 is giving your opponents a +3 2-hit modifier. And at the same time, you have a -2 bonus to your 2-hit with those large pulse lasers. So you're going to be fairly reliable at landing hits against your opponent. And this is also very nice combined with the fact that the clan large pulse laser is an undercosted weapon. It doesn't cost nearly as much battle value as it should given its power. And so unlike a lot of longer range fast mechs, this Huntsman is not too overcosted. It's not overcosted at all, I would say. The Phoenix Hawk 2C is another clan mech that's available early and that excels in an evasion role because it's got 585 movement, so it's got the same evasive capabilities as that Huntsman, but it's got an 80-ton body together with significant armor. So this mech is really resilient, more resilient than that Huntsman, and a lot of the versions mount significant long-range firepower, especially this variant here that has 4 LRM-20s. Okay, you got some pretty crazy long-range firepower on top of speed, on top of a resilient armored body. Now, in eras that run late into BattleTech history, especially like the current Ill Clan era, a faction that just has incredible selections of mechs for use in evasion lists is Clan Jade Falcon. So to illustrate what I'm talking about, what this kind of list can be good at, I'm going to construct an evasion list using the Jade Falcon master unit list. This list is built using the Jade Falcon's Dark Age unit selection, and I think it's extremely powerful. Like, this is much, much cheaper and cheesier than any list that I would bring to my local game store, or even really to an MRC tournament. The basis for the list is it's built around 3 mechs, 3 kind of heavier, fast mechs, and the goal is to play the list in such a way that none of these mechs is ever really seriously threatened by enemy forces, and still they get to put out some solid damage output over the course of the game. The first one of these 3 mechs is a medium omni-mech called the Jade Falcon A, and this thing is just kind of, I was going to say it's kind of insane, but it's completely insane. Now, this mech is a 45-ton mech with pretty close to maximum armor, and because of a combination of improved jump jets and a partial wing, this thing can jump 10, which, I mean, the target movement modifier you're getting from that is +5. There's just no way to hit this thing unless you're packing the most insane, like, targeting computer and pulse laser loadout. And even then, it's pretty easy to avoid enemy forces that have those capabilities with just the movement abilities that this Jade Falcon has. And what you do with this mech is you plink with your large pulse laser if enemy mechs or forces are looking kind of dangerous. And then if you have an opportunity, of course, you can jump into a rear or a vulnerable side and just blast away with all of this thing's shorter ranged weapons. With these really fast jumping mechs, you should always aim to jump into woods if that's a convenient way to make an attack, because the additional difficulty from firing into woods just compounds with that jump movement modifier, and it's just going to make your mech impossible to hit. The second one of these 3 core mechs, which is also just completely overpowered, is the Jade Phoenix A, which is kind of like that Jade Falcon's big brother. He also has just this amazing jump setup, so this mech can jump 7, and it's an 85-ton mech. So, and it's got pretty much, again, maximum armor. This thing is, it can collect a lot of hits and still survive, and it's going to be extremely hard to hit. So you should be pretty courageous with this mech, and it has an Ultra AC-20, so you should feel free to kind of jump within even the short range of that Ultra AC-20 against most opponents and just fire off a salvo. You're going to be very difficult to hit because of your movement modifier. If things are looking a little dicier, you can move farther out and focus on the pulse lasers as your arsenal, but really for much of the game you should typically feel pretty free to just fire away with this thing. It's going to be able to take considerable damage in addition to evading damage. And then the slowest and most vulnerable of those 3 mechs, although not especially vulnerable, is this long-ranged variant of the Thor 2. This is definitely the guy where if you're going to lose one of those 3 core mechs, it'll be the Thor 2. So you want to keep it back. Ideally keep it back at kind of the medium range of those extended range large lasers. So opponents will typically not have medium range on you. You tend to want to jump with this thing, keep it far out. You won't have the best target numbers, but it does have a targeting computer. So your numbers aren't going to be terrible. And just try to plink them. You've got plenty of long range weapons for plinking. The mech is not going to exactly earn out its battle value in terms of destroying 3,000 battle value worth of enemy mechs, but it doesn't need to do that. Just keep in mind that the goal of this list is not 100% so much to earn battle value by destroying enemy mechs. The point of the list is to deny your opponent points by protecting your 3 highest BV mechs. So it really is a points denial strategy. It's primarily about making sure that your opponent doesn't destroy any of your things that you spent significant BV on. So then to get us to 10,000 battle value, I fill out the list with some chaff that's cheap, and can cause trouble for your opponent. In this case, 2 units of elementals, always a good way to cause trouble for your enemy, and a Dasher H with its extremely powerful close range rear attack capability. So you can put one of those battle armor units on that Dasher H and one on the Jade Falcon and just run them in, drop them off near your enemy's longer ranged, sniper forces maybe, and create trouble for them. They'll be trying to deal with the battle armor, and then while they're doing that, you can just blast away with your longer ranged, bigger mechs that are going to be pretty much invulnerable at that kind of range. That's one option. Or you can kind of drop the battle armor at a moderate range behind cover in between you and your opponent to keep them from advancing towards your big powerful mechs, and then hold that Dasher back as a kind of deterrent, right? They'll be afraid to move too close to the Dasher. That's another option for you. Ultimately, you're going to expect that you will end up losing both of the units of elementals and the Dasher, so you're going to want to be able to do about like 1,500 battle value worth of damage to your opponent. But that should be pretty easy to do with the kind of firepower on the Jade Falcon and the Jade Phoenix and the Thor 2. Okay, so I feel kind of bad because what I've basically done over the course of this video is tell you guys how to create the most ridiculous cheese list, a list that's much cheesier than any list that I have ever played in any actual competitive event. So, take all of this with a big grain of salt in the sense you don't want to bring this list against your friends necessarily. You don't want to bring this list to a tournament that's supposed to be fun. You might try it out once at your home store to see how fun it is to just completely wipe the floor with somebody. But overall, you should think of this as a paradigm rather than an example of a list that you should actually take in the game. So this is kind of the purest form of an evasion list. And then you should think, well, what kind of list can I make that's a little bit similar to this, but is less just kind of terrible to play against? So something that's certainly quite a bit less cheesy is to see what can the inner sphere do, what's the best that the inner sphere can do in terms of constructing one of these longer ranged evasion lists. So one possibility would be a Comstar list based around the Falconer 9R, which is kind of a longer range jumping mech that the inner sphere has access to. This is a very nice kind of jumping sniper. It's vulnerable compared with those clan mechs because it has an inner sphere XL engine. So this list is definitely going to be much less unbeatable than the clan version. So I structure the list around 2 of those Falconers and then a long-range variant of the Blackhawk KU, which has an ER large laser and an LRM-20. So these are going to be the kind of longer-ranged, very hard-to-hit mechs. Then I've put in a Spectre that has stealth armor, so that gives you some more extremely powerful evasion capabilities. That's going to be a very difficult mech to hit. So that's kind of the core of the unit. I would expect those 4 mechs not to really collect a lot of damage over the course of the game if you play the list right. You are depending on jump 5 instead of jump 7 or 10 like we had for a lot of the key mechs in that clan list. So you are definitely more vulnerable. And the Inner Sphere XL engine also makes you more vulnerable. So this list, again, is not going to be as defensively powerful as that clan version. And then I round it out with some chaff a little bit similar to the stuff I put into the clan list. You've got a 1A Owens, which is a nice cheap little light mech. And then you bring some Inner Sphere standard battle armor. A nice thing about Comstar is that they can take battle armor in units of 6 battle suits, which is very nice because 6 battle suits, Inner Sphere battle suits are so much less resilient than the clan ones. But when you put 6 of them together, they do have a really solid chunk of armor and more powerful weapons because you're getting 6 of those flamers instead of just 4. So you can play this list out with a strategy that's a lot like the one that I discussed for the clan list. It's just going to be a lot harder for you because these Inner Sphere mechs are much less invulnerable than those clan versions. So this is all I have for you today in terms of our look at evasion as a strategy and a lance construction paradigm in BattleTech. There's a whole lot more you can do with evasion. There's a lot of kind of intermediate versions of the strategy that you can try to use. So there's a lot more to talk about. And any of you experienced players or new players with questions, just kind of bring them up in the chat. That would be really great to kind of build some discussion around this philosophy of BattleTech lance design.